Hello, and welcome to the Applicant Podcast. I'm Rebecca Tripp, and today I'm joined by Maggie Piper, the sister of Cassia Piper from episode 1 and 2. Maggie graduated from Trent University with a degree in International Development Studies, and she is now the Director of Operations at Flex Legal. We'll be discussing her experiences leading up to graduation, as well as her time as an international student in more than one country. So without further ado, here she is.
Hi, Maggie, and welcome to the podcast. I'd like to start off by asking you to just quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, great. I'm Maggie. I'm 23 years old, turning 24 in 2 weeks, and I'm from Peterborough, Ontario. I recently graduated from Trent University in international development, and now I work for a company called Flex Legal, which is a freelance lawyer and law clerk and paralegal company. And so I'm their director of operations. I work remotely for them, and I'm currently in Brazil working remotely with my husband, who's from here.
Wonderful. I'm jealous. I'm sure the weather is really nice there.
If you think 35 degrees and humid is nice, I mean,
Sure.
yes.
It's better than the Canadian weather that we
Yes.
are experiencing right now.
Agreed.
So why don't you kind of dive into your educational background? I find it super interesting. So if you can provide as much detail as you'd like, that would be great.
Yes, it can be a long story, but I'll start with high school.
Sure.
I wasn't a great fan of high school for many reasons, and I just wanted to get out. So I started taking online classes in the summer, and I started taking online classes alongside my regular high school classes so that I could graduate early. And I ended up graduating a semester early and going to France and traveling and working there. But then I returned home to start university kind of on time. So I could still kind of have that gap year experience without taking a gap year.
Mhm.
So I started at Mount Allison University in Sackville, New Brunswick, a very small school. Many people don't know about it. I didn't know about it until the year before I went there. And I started in politics. So I stayed there. And in my first year, I applied for a Killam Fellowship, which was an exchange program basically. And I applied to go to Washington, D.C. in the US, and I got it, which was really exciting for first year Maggie. And so my second year, I started again in Sackville, but then in my second semester, I went to the US in DC and I studied politics there, which, as you can imagine, studying politics in DC was very interesting, especially at that time, because the US election had just happened. So I was there for the Women's March and lots of things were happening. Side note, I also met my now husband there. So it was educational, but also just a lot of fun. And I met a lot of great people. When I was there, I applied for another exchange, this time in the Netherlands. So I actually never went back to Mount Allison. My third year, I spent the first semester in Brazil with my partner, and I took a couple of classes online through a remote university. And then in my second semester, I went to the Netherlands and studied there. So then after all this, I said to myself, there's no way I can go back to Sackville, New Brunswick, a small little town. I wasn't very happy there in my first year. So I made the decision and I transferred back home to Peterborough, Trent University, which is where I finished my degree. I transferred to the program International Development. And I spent my last 2 years there. And then I graduated. So it was 5 years in total, lots of different places. And now here I am.
I think it's so great that you just took advantage of the opportunities that were in front of you. And yeah, it's super fascinating to see how it kind of unfolded. And I think it's great that you landed at Trent University, as I'm a alumni from there as well. So yeah, super, super interesting. So can you tell me about the thought process on deciding what school and program to go to? And I know like there's a lot of schools and a lot of programs in your history.
Yeah.
But if you can just kind of explain a bit about your thought process on politics or the international development studies.
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was applying for university. I definitely was one of those people that just felt I had to do it. You know, I didn't mind school and studying that much. My parents both went to university. They, you know, they're kind of pushing me towards that. So I knew I kind of felt like I had to. So I applied to 4 schools: McGill, University of Toronto, Trent, and Mount Allison. And I just chose kind of random programs from each one because I was interested in politics. I was interested in international affairs, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I just kind of randomly applied, and I ended up choosing Mount Allison simply because I went to like one talk with the president of the university, and I just really liked him and I liked his message. And so without thinking too much about it, I was like, okay, I'll go there. And I really wanted to get away from home. And that was the furthest away from home, not because I don't love my home, I love my family, but I was really wanting like an adventure. So I ended up choosing a school very far away and a program that I was like, it's interesting. I guess I could do a lot with it. And so I ended up with politics. And then international development, it was really just the closest program to politics. And so when you transfer, you have to, you know, transfer your credits. So it was the closest one that I could transfer to. And I ended up really loving it a lot more than politics. So I'm happy with that decision.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about the program at Trent, and what were your classes like?
Yes. So Mount Allison, the classes were, you know, one of the reasons I went there is the classes were told to be small, you know, intimate, one-on-one with teachers. But I didn't really get that impression when I went there, especially in my first year. There was bigger classrooms. So when I went to Trent, I was happily surprised. The classes were very, very small. And, you know, everyone knew each other. And the professors were super, super friendly and, you know, really involved with what they were teaching and really excited to teach it. So I was really surprised by how much I liked my classes at Trent. Very, very theoretical. I think you might have experienced that, but that's not something I minded. I mean, I always want more practical, hands-on experiences, but that's hard to get in international development when you're studying in Peterborough, I guess. But it was great. And just I got to know my professors and I was really involved in, you know, what I was learning. So yeah, I was happy with it.
Yeah. And I feel the exact same way. And I think you said it really well that, you know, the classrooms are small, and I think that's important. And I too have a degree in international development studies. And what I really liked about it was the fact that the teachers were approachable. And I think that has something to do with the fact that they were like passionate about what they were teaching, and it was smaller classes. So they knew your name. So yeah, I too really enjoyed that program.
Yeah, I mean, I came into it as a transfer student. You know, all the students there had been together studying for, what was it, 3 years by then?
Yeah.
So they all knew each other and the teachers knew them. And I really did feel like an outsider at first. But very quickly, I got to know the teachers and, you know, they got to know my name, as you said. So it was easy to kind of transfer into that environment, which would have been harder at a bigger school, I think, like U of T. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I know that every single student has some highs and some lows. So I'm wondering if you might be able to tell us a bit about maybe one of the struggles that you had during your whole educational journey, and also maybe a highlight that you look back on fondly.
definitely. So I have a lot of both. I think most university students do.
Yeah.
Definitely the hardest year for me at university was my first year. I went to a very small school, as I said. It was a small, small town. I didn't have a car, so I was really isolated there. And I was living in residence, which was fun, and I highly recommend it. But it also it puts you in this world with no perspective. You're surrounded by students and only students. And yeah, I felt very isolated there. I didn't have a lot of friends. And I ended up just being sick a lot because I wasn't sleeping enough. You know, I wasn't eating healthy. So I would spend days in bed. I would be missing classes. And ultimately it wasn't a very healthy place for me to be, which is why I ended up going on all these exchanges. It kind of inspired me to get out a bit. So, which kind of takes me to the highlights, which were definitely my exchanges. I encourage everyone to do that if they can. Just so much about it, like meeting people was the best, like meeting people from around the world, meeting my now husband, obviously, but also getting the perspective of how people like learn and teach in other countries. Specifically the Netherlands, the educational system there was amazing. And it was a lot of hands-on learning. And like we did projects for organizations that actually were put into place, stuff like that. And I just loved that experience. And then the other highlight that I want to mention is living with friends. Like I said, I lived in residence, hated it. And now when I was at Trent, I lived with my family. Loved it, but not that much.
Yeah.
In the middle, I lived with two of my best friends in our own apartment. And that was an amazing, amazing experience. And I wish I could have done it longer. I wish I could do it now. But it was so great to live with friends and just, have our own little bubble. So yeah, those are my highlights.
Yeah. And I feel like that's a highlight for a lot of people. When you are in your undergrad, it is your first time kind of like away from home. And while residence is amazing, it's a lot of different personalities where when you can live with your friends, you obviously like each other because you're calling each other friends. And you have someone that can relate to you, to what you're currently doing and what you're currently going through. And you have someone that can, study with you for exams, even if they're in different programs or different classes. So I too really think it's a good idea to live with friends if you're able to in your undergrad.
Yeah. I mean, I lived with friends, and then in my exchange to the Netherlands, I lived with two strangers I had never met, and we ended up being great friends. So that can also be an option, if you're open to it. And it was amazing, having someone to force you out of bed, force you to class, force you to eat with them, socialize. I can be a very closed person. I'm an introvert, but like to live with other people really forces me to get out there, which is good. I need that.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking back at everything, is there anything that you would do differently now?
Yes and no. I mean, I'm happy with where I landed, and obviously I had a lot of great experiences I'm very grateful for. I think this relates to what we were just talking about. I think I wish I had reached out to more people, and I wish I had kept those connections because, like I said, I'm an introvert. I am very content being by myself, but the best experiences of my university career, my whole life, were, when I was surrounding myself with people and doing things with people. So I do wish, my first year of university, I hadn't just, caved in and succumbed to the loneliness. I wish I had joined more clubs. I wish I'd gotten to know my teachers better, even if I thought I didn't like them.
Yeah.
I wish I had talked to the people on my floor in my residence more. And then the same goes with the people I met on my exchanges. I wish I had kept in touch with them more. I met amazing people, but they kind of drift away, as life goes on. And now I sit here, I'm like, wow, all those amazing people I met in university who were interested in the same things as me. I wish I could like pick up the phone and call them and be like, hey, what are you doing? Let's catch up,
Yeah.
So that's what I would do differently. It's just like really, foster those relationships and keep them going.
Yeah. And I find it's hard when you are in school to keep up with everything that like you should be doing, quotation marks, should, because there are so many things on your plate, right? There's classes, exams, extracurriculars, friends.
Yeah.
And I'm sure like, I think everyone at that time just did the best they could. And like looking back, you're like, oh, I wish I put in a little bit more effort in like X, Y, and Z. But it's hard to tick all those boxes. And I mean, especially in your first year, when you are trying to like manage everything, I don't think you're alone when you say that you kind of like succumb to like everything that was going on. I think it's common.
Yeah. And it does feel like if I were to have given more to my social life, I would have had to give him less given less. Yeah, given less to
Gave?
my
Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't in the English program. I would have had to give less to my studies, so it was kind of a give and take with university. I also had a job throughout that entire thing, many different jobs.
Yeah.
Sometimes I worked like 4 jobs at a time while studying. So
Yeah.
I have to be a little easier on myself. I didn't necessarily have a lot of time
Yeah.
to make those relationships, but that is something I would probably prioritize if I were to do it again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So if you were to go back to school again, I don't know if you put any thought to this, but is there a program or a school that you would want to pursue?
I think I really like Trent, and I was really happy with the program I chose there. So I think I would skip the whole Mount Allison thing and stick with Trent. And, I liked being home, near home. And because I do travel a lot, I'm away from home a lot, especially because my husband's Brazilian. So having those years with my family is nice. So yeah, I would have just stuck with Trent and international development.
Fair. So after graduation, like shortly after graduation, you joined Flex Legal. So it's been a few months, and I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit about your transition from being a student to joining the workforce. And I know you were a student during your you were working during your time as a student.
Yes.
But there is a difference between being a part-time employee versus a full-time employee.
Definitely.
So I'm wondering if you can touch on that a bit.
Yeah, definitely. So I was the manager of a cafe when I graduated from school. So I was working in the summer doing that, which was a lot of work. You've worked in the service industry, you're aware. It's a lot of work. It's tiring. And when I was working there, that's when I started applying for jobs. So I got this job with Flex Legal, which was amazing. And so I transitioned from, student working in the service industry to working remotely at a desk for a freelance lawyer company. So that was very different and in a good way, I will say. Love the service industry, loved being a student, but it's tiring. I was exhausted, and that wasn't giving me a lot of time for other things in my life. Now that I'm working, 5 p.m. hits, I can just close my laptop, shut off my phone, and I have time for other things in my life. And then I like going to bed. I'm looking forward to working the next day, I'm feeling well rested, So I'm really glad to be out of university, honestly. And I think I was ready for this, steadiness of like 9 to 5 job working and knowing what to expect and feeling like I'm good at something too, I'm more confident in my job.
Yeah. And I can absolutely relate to the transition, because I too worked while I was a student. And there is something, it's very calming to be able to know when you are walking away from your work. And when you're students, that homework, I feel like, just kind of hovers for the whole time that you're a student.
Exactly.
And like not all jobs, like there are a lot of jobs where there's a lot of overtime, but there is something really special about being able to at 5 o'clock walk away. So I'm glad to hear that it was a good transition for you.
Yeah, when I graduated and I could focus on just working in the cafe, because I was doing both for so long. I graduated and I was like, oh, a huge weight just lifted off my shoulder. And I didn't have this lingering like, oh, you should be reading, your readings, you should be doing this. Like, oh, now I just have to think about making coffee for people. And now I just have to think about answering emails. And it's just, it's a weight lifted off my shoulders for sure.
Yeah. So you've been working in the legal industry for not too long, but you are in it now. So I'm wondering, if you could, is there anything that you would like to see change in the legal industry?
Yeah, obviously I'm not the greatest person to answer this, but I think what we do is we mostly help lawyers who have too much work on their plate. And so I think I see the part of the legal industry that's overworked, tired, and, needs more assistance desperately.
Yeah.
So from what I see and with the people I work with, I would change that expectation that lawyers should be working, 24/7 on the weekend, up at midnight, emailing. It just seems tiring. And when I'm like, my boss is a lawyer, and I obviously talk to a lot of lawyers, I interview lawyers, and that's a common thing I hear is just, they're working all the time and they don't know if they can take holidays, and they don't even have time to, answer a call. They're always in a rush. And as someone who looks forward to turning off my computer at 5 p.m., I wish that same, present to lawyers and other legal professionals.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Yeah. And I too work, in the legal industry, in the same kind of capacity of helping lawyers help themselves.
Yeah.
And I find a common comment I get is, I took too much on, and I find it's just easier if I do it on my own versus delegate. So now I'm in this situation where I have so much on my plate that like I actually cannot get it done.
Yes.
So I too think that would be a really, and I don't know how to really change that other than to kind of change the conversation about how lawyers are expected to work. I don't think they should be expected to work 60, 70 hours a week. And I think they put that on themselves.
It's the culture.
It's the culture. Yeah. Yeah. And I do hope that changes. And I do think everything that's gone on with this pandemic, I think it's kind of opened up a lot of people's eyes on the fact that work is not your whole world. There is other things that you need to prioritize outside of work. And it's important that you do have a work-life balance. So yeah. I hope that changes. And I think it is kind of changing.
I guess I also see the opposite of that as lawyers that have like given up that life and they move to freelancing because they have more control over their time, as you would know, right?
Yeah.
They do want more time with their family or to travel or whatever. So they do move to freelancing. And I think that's a huge trend that's happening right now. So yeah, something's going to change. Otherwise everyone's going to be a freelancer or.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd like to end this interview with some quick questions, just to kind of end it on a fun note. So first question, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Coffee. Me too. Me too.
I'm very passionate about that.
Yeah. Favorite book?
The God of Small Things.
Okay. I haven't heard of that one before.
I highly recommend.
Okay.
If you like language and, people playing with language, really good.
Okay. Okay. Do you have a favorite podcast, YouTube channel, or Netflix series that you're following right now?
No, I don't tend to follow series. I don't know why, but I watch really random clips here and there, like Cody Co, and just super random, like lighthearted things, maybe a baking show or an interior designing show. But I haven't really been following any series, podcasts, or anything for a long time.
Fair, fair. What is your must-have tech item?
My laptop, for sure, over my cell phone any day. I love the big screen and typing.
Yeah, and it's good for your eyes. It's good. It's a good one to keep around.
Yeah.
Last one. If you could have a superpower, what would it be?
Traveling like this. I don't know if that's called time travel or space travel, but being able to see my family in Peterborough, Ontario, and then my husband's family in Brazil, like that would be really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you can also go to different places too. Like you can like snap your fingers and on the weekend.
I don't want to get too greedy. No, I would be happy just being able to go between the two places.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so very last question. What advice would you give your 18-year-old self if she was sitting right in front of you?
It's funny because I don't feel much older than 18 still, I don't feel like I'm in a place to give my 18-year-old self advice, but if I had to, it would relate back to the thing I was saying before about, keeping those connections and making the connections,
Mhm.
I would say, manage your anxiety, find a way to manage your anxiety. It's worth it. And push past that, meet more people, and keep those connections, because when you're done school, when you're done your job, that's what's going to matter. That's what's going to make you happy.
Mhm.
And yeah, that's my goal for 2022, is to rekindle some connections and keep in touch with people.
Wonderful. I think that's great advice. I think that's good advice for 18-year-old Maggie.
Yes, you probably wouldn't take it though. But I asked my grandma, who was 90 at the time, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? I asked her this years ago, and she said to me, don't listen to your teachers and kiss all the boys. And that was the best answer I've ever heard. And so I want to emulate that energy as well. Kiss all the people you want, be happy. Maybe listen to your teachers, but yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I really appreciate you being willing to come on and talk about all the things regarding your past 5-ish years. I think it's super interesting. And so thank you. Thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So that's all for today. Thank you for listening to the Applicant Podcast. You can watch these videos on YouTube, or you can listen to these episodes wherever you listen to your other podcast episodes. Next week, we will have my friend Danny, who is a Trent University graduate, and she'll be talking about her time as a English literature major, as well as her time abroad in England. So thanks again, and I hope to have you join again soon. Bye.